Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining our panel discussion today. We're going to present you with a number of perspectives on why and how organizations can maintain the gains of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace to help them recover, revive, and grow as we emerge from the COVID pandemic. Now, you'll be hearing from the four of us on the screen here. First, I'll be speaking on the business case for diversity. And my name's Jeanette. I'm a management consultant with German-based company SMC, who are the hosts of this conference. And I'm also a race and bias trainer with the Diversity Trust in the UK. I've been involved with diversity-related work my whole professional career as a textbook developer, teacher, and university lecturer. I was engaged with the decolonization of the curriculum. And now as an independent consultant, I've been offering training in culture and diversity since about 2005. My colleagues here, Magano, Neri, Tichaona, Mazarira, and Natasha, Williams-Phatela, will introduce themselves at the beginning of their sessions. Magano will be presenting on women in the workplace. Tich will share some research on COVID and inequality in Namibia, and he'll be highlighting the global lessons for corporations. And I will add some findings from the UK. And finally, Natasha will share some practical tips for embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion practices in the workplace. So it would actually be great to hear a little bit about you, to know who's in the room. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat, giving your name and the region or country that you're calling in from. And it would be nice to know your occupation or the company you're working for. And please feel free to comment in the chat at any time. There will be a little bit of time right at the end to do some more questions and answers. This is how we're going to try to simulate the panel discussion aspect of these presentations. So we're going to get started. Hope you're ready. So, why is diversity good for business? I want to get you thinking to start with, so this is a little gap fill exercise for you. These are 4 projections that are based on a 2020 study by McKinsey on inclusion. So I'd like you to think of what the missing number or word is in each statement, and I'll give you a few moments to consider your answers, then I'll show you the completed information. All right, so here are the projections. The first one is that gender diversity increases profitability by 25%. Second is that ethnic and cultural diversity increases profitability by 36%. Thirdly, the higher the representation, easy, the higher the likelihood of outperformance. And the more diverse companies are, the more likely they are to outperform non-diverse companies on profitability. So I hope here that you can see the link between diversity and profitability. Of course, you're welcome to look up the study yourself. There are lots of benefits of diversity in the workplace. We've talked about profitability. Obviously, that's the sort of end point. And there are many ways in which diversity enables you to enhance your revenue and profitability. Here are some of the general benefits of diversity in the workplace. And what we know is that a well-integrated diversity, equity, and inclusion approach ensures that a variety of perspectives are there, and that will facilitate innovative thinking and troubleshooting, and it will resonate with your customers. It will help you to attract and retain the best talent and drive employee engagement, which we know is a major determining factor in business success. I think we're all familiar with this scenario. It's the struggle to come up with new ideas when we're working in a homogeneous environment. We all know that innovation is increasingly necessary for a business to thrive in our fast-changing world. And studies repeatedly show that more diverse teams and organizations are more innovative. So if we now consider diversity in the context of the pandemic, we hit a contradiction. Some of the benefits of diversity, and most notably innovation and resilience, will be very much in need as companies recover from the COVID crisis. So diversity is really at a premium at this point in time, and it should be a priority for any organization that wants to thrive, right? But what we've learned from previous world crises, like the global financial crisis of 2008, is that there's a real risk that companies will actually deprioritize diversity and focus on their most pressing basic needs. And this means that they'll be placing themselves at a disadvantage and failing to position themselves for growth and renewal. So I'd like you to think about that. Is your company likely to fall into this crisis management trap? And another important thing to remember as we go on is that representation alone is not enough. That's why we talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as a complete package. Equity and inclusion are, if you like, the activators that make diversity work. As this slide shows, diversity is about representation. Equity is about removing and redressing barriers within the organization so that those people who are represented have full access to opportunities and can occupy meaningful positions. Inclusion is concerned with creating an enabling environment in which everyone feels they belong and is able to contribute to their full potential. Now I'm going to hand over to Magano Neri, who is going to focus in on the gender aspect of diversity, in particular looking at women's place in leadership.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be sharing some insights into the significance of having women in leadership now more than ever. I'm a Namibian consultant. My background is in social policy and gender rights advocacy, and I have experience both in Africa and in the US. I've also headed up a women's rights NGO here in Namibia, and I now consult with a variety of international development organizations, as well as private sector companies, and I also offer transformational processes for women of color in freedom and belonging and using truth as a technique for transformation. According to the Gender Equality in Public Administration report of 2021, on average, women are 46% of public administrators, but hold only 31% of top leadership positions and comprise only 30% of senior managers. That's a 15 to 16% gap. Though there's been progress in women's representation overall in public administration in many countries, women in all regions of the world are still significantly outnumbered by men in leadership and decision-making positions. Persistent gaps remain, and women continue to hit glass ceilings and glass walls that stop them from advancing to positions at the highest levels of power and influence. A surprising number of people still don't trust women to lead effectively. A general stereotype is that women are ineffective leaders because we are not dominant and authoritative or agentic, or that our voices aren't as loud. And many of us aren't physically large. We're physically small. Leaving women out of these critical decision-making roles and processes, including in COVID-19 efforts, is threatening an inclusive and green recovery from the pandemic. In fact, COVID has seen an alarming rise in violence against women and girls, and a large loss of jobs and income, which are threatening to set back the progress that has already been made in gender equality. Now, definitions and experiences of leadership have evolved over the past century, but leadership has often been described using words that have traditionally been seen as masculine qualities. This century, values and traits more traditionally associated with feminine qualities have been increasingly gaining traction and have been particularly sought after during the COVID pandemic. Take a look at these two columns in this slide. Which of the columns of words in this slide would you generally associate with feminine qualities and which with masculine qualities? So the left-hand column contains words that have traditionally been seen as masculine, while the right-hand column contains words we would traditionally consider to be feminine. It's important to note that although these qualities have traditionally been ascribed according to gender expectations, that both men and women can certainly embody both. The point here is that leadership continues to be associated with only the masculine terms, mostly the masculine terms. Women leaders have historically faced a gender double bind, however. They are penalized for being too masculine, but also penalized for being too feminine. Women leaders who flout gender expectations are labeled aggressive or pushy, and those who perform along gender expectations are labeled too nice or not taken seriously enough. Crises like pandemics offer an opportunity for women world leaders to reconcile this double bind. They can be both decisive and strategic, as well as compassionate and nurturing. However, women do bring different experiences, different skills, perspectives, and structural and cultural differences that are essential for driving effective solutions in organizations, solutions that are more encompassing and inclusive, and that tap into new possibilities. I'll just let you take in the slide for a moment. So while correlation is not the same as causation and other factors do come into play, after applying controls for such factors, studies have conclusively shown that the gender of the leader is a decisive factor. And this supports the idea that women are better equipped for handling a health crisis. So what made the difference? Female leaders, for one, acted more decisively and quickly. They put lives before the economy. They made proactive and coordinated policy responses. They focused on minimizing uncertainty, and they communicated in a more targeted and nuanced way. The impact of female leadership during COVID-19 demonstrates a significant change in approaches to handling complex problems. Countries that emphasized the economy lagged behind with poorer outcomes. The stoic, macho attitude that we saw with several male world leaders conveying a kind of a sense of invincibility is a particular liability in the face of a pandemic, as people look to leaders for guidance on how to behave. All leaders will benefit from developing more feminine traits as we move forward to create more effective, inclusive, and resilient new norms. Let's look at women in the workplace specifically. Representation is only one part of the story. The pandemic continues to take a toll on employees and especially women. Women are even more burned out now than they were a year ago, and burnout is escalating rather much faster among women than it is amongst men. Here are some findings of a major study by McKinsey in corporate America. Firstly, women are rising to the moment as stronger leaders and taking on the extra work that comes with this compared with men at the same level. Women are also doing more to support their teams and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And they're also more likely to be allies to women of color. Yet, this critical work is going unrecognized and unrewarded by most companies, and that has concerning implications. Companies, in fact, risk losing the very leaders they need right now, and it's hard to imagine organizations navigating the ongoing pandemic, building inclusive workplaces if this work is not truly valued. The McKinsey study showed that 1 in 3 women says that they have considered downshifting their career or leaving the workforce this year, and this is compared with 1 in 4 who said this a few months into the pandemic. Also, 4 in 10 women have considered leaving their company or switching jobs altogether, and a high turnover in recent months suggests that many of them are actually following through. Women make up 49.6% of the world population. We need to be able to be at the table as equals, to share our perspectives, to share our solutions and observations, to pave the way to rethinking economic paradigms and also reorienting public policies towards an equal world. This is especially true for women at the intersections of race, social class, identity, and many other categories. A handful of women in power alone will not be enough. The change must be pervasive. Businesses need to harness the potential of the entire talent pool in order to be expansive and successful. If we can bring our whole selves to the table, if all of us can bring our whole selves to the table, our contributions will be exponentially magnifying of our organization's potential. Thank you so much for listening and for participating. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Tichaona Mazarira, who has some Africa-based data to share with us.
Thank you, Magano. Thank you for those very important insights. And my name is Tichaona Mazarira. I am a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Government Studies, Northwest University in South Africa. I'm also going to talk on the similar issue like Mahano with regards to diversity in the workplace, but within the context of COVID-19. Right, so before starting, my background includes public policy, socioeconomic inequalities. I also look at research and development in Africa, right? So today I'm going to talk about COVID and income inequality in Namibia, but I'm also going to give a global context, right? So to start with, right, so I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 regulations on economically disadvantaged students, right? So when lockdown regulations were put, or rather came into force in different parts of the world, many schools and many educational institutions, including universities, had to shut their doors and switch to internet-based learning. Remote learning meant students had to work from home, continuing to attend classes and carrying out academic activities remotely. However, no measures were put in place to make sure the transition would be smooth in most cases, right? Especially for students coming from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think this would be very much the case for Africa and some other developing countries, right? So some of the challenges that students faced include prohibitive data costs, limited Wi-Fi access, right? And these issues really became of great concern, right? Especially for students coming from poorer backgrounds. And at the same time, you would find that some students didn't have access to the devices, right? So such as laptops, that they would need to live stream classes, to write and timely submit their assignments and exams, as in most cases, even exams had to be done online. Right, so while my research may be focused on Namibia, right, this trend appears to be global, as suggested by recent findings. As you can see there, UNICEF found that 1 in 3 children missed out on remote learning when COVID-19, shut down most of the schools, right? And this is a global statistic, right? Furthermore, UNICEF reports that at least 463 million children whose schools were closed due to COVID-19 did not experience any form of remote learning. In other words, these students would naturally fall behind as the COVID crisis begins to ease, right? Right, so what you see now is you've got in front of you some statistics regarding access to different technologies, right? So what you see for developing countries, you'd see that with regards to radio and TV, access is quite good, is generally good. However, 47% internet access is problematic, especially within the context of remote learning, online classes, etc. You see for sub-Saharan Africa particularly that access to internet is estimated to be 19%, and this was in 2020. So that presents quite a challenge, particularly for students who are disadvantaged and coming from poorer backgrounds, right? While my research may be focused on Namibia, it does appear that this trend also includes developed countries, right? We can expect, generally speaking, that across all technologies, right, in the developed countries, that this challenge may be there, particularly for disadvantaged groups coming from low-income households, right? And if we were to take the UK, for example, single-parent families and students coming from minority ethnic communities would probably face similar challenges in terms of internet connectivity, right? These groups have disproportionate challenges when it comes to access to the internet and digital devices for study purposes. According to an independent study done in the UK, they found that Black and minority ethnic households are twice as likely to live in poverty as their white counterparts, leaving them disproportionately exposed to job losses and pay cuts caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Again, a report done by the Social Metrics Commission in the UK, again, found that nearly half of Black African Caribbean households were in poverty, compared with just 1 in 5 white families, right? And they also found that Black and ethnic minority households or families as a whole were between 2 to 3 times likely to be in persistent poverty than white households. So this goes to show the extent to which, even in the developed world, that you would find that minority groups would and students coming from poorer backgrounds would begin to have challenges as well, just like in developing countries. So especially in the context of families that cannot afford devices, you would find that it would be difficult. For example, if a family of 5 has 3 children, has 1 device that would have to be shared by the children to do their assignments and homework, right? The fact that they would have to rotate means that there's limited time, and probably the quality of education there would drop significantly. So this is a problem, like I say, that goes beyond Africa and would also certainly affect developed countries like the United Kingdom. So finally, so this is where I've been driving the whole presentation towards, right? And I'm sure some of you are asking yourself, what does this presentation, how is it relevant, right, to us as corporates? Well, I would say that corporate social responsibility programs can actually help, and in the sense that if certain interventions are done, then we would be able to make sure that at-risk students coming from minority backgrounds and disadvantaged backgrounds or poor families would be able to stay in school, and eventually they would able to be recruited and also help with maintaining or even increasing the diversity in the workplace, right? So there's a need for the corporate world to allocate funding to close the technological gap between the haves and the have-nots, right? So in the case of Namibia, the vast majority of students who are disadvantaged are Black, and some come from marginalized indigenous groups. In a global context, minority cultural groups are often overrepresented among the disadvantaged, right? If these students perform poorly academically or drop out of school, it will have a direct impact on diversity in the workplace in the near future. So what we're saying is, if these students are not assisted now, in the next 2 decades, companies will begin to struggle to find qualified candidates from diverse backgrounds, right? Which obviously, like I said, would affect the diversity in the corporate world. Consequently, this will result in less racial diversity in the workplace, and possibly it could wipe away many of the gains that have been achieved in terms of cultural diversity over the last half a century. Therefore, it is in the corporate world's best interest to intervene through CSR programs that can address the challenges COVID-19 has created for global education. Thank you. I hope this presentation will give you some insights into the importance of maintaining diversity in the workplace. I will now hand over to Jeanette, who will be talking about a similar theme in the UK.
Thank you, Tichaona. I would now like to share some perspectives from the UK. It has been much touted that COVID has acted as an equalizer, that it does not discriminate, that we're all in the same boat. But do the statistics really support this? I'm going to share with you some conclusions drawn from several different studies conducted by the Office for National Statistics, Public Health England, and some private consulting firms. We've brought together different studies here so that we can present you with something of a bigger picture. And what we find is that quite apart from acting as an equalizer, the pandemic has exposed and exacerbated inequalities. Let me show you the statistics that we've highlighted. These are just a few. So firstly, you're more likely to die with COVID-19 if you're elderly, male, living in a deprived area, Black or Asian, a care worker, security officer, or a driver. So here you can see these are UK statistics that age, gender, the place where you live, which is related to your socioeconomic background, your racial identity, and even your occupation can mean a very different set of outcomes if you catch COVID-19. Next, the studies have found that while men spent more time working from home than women, and this is interesting, women spent significantly more time, that's 64% more time, on unpaid household work and childcare. Now, obviously, this is not to say that men have not chipped in, but these are the statistical averages. Women, again, scored significantly higher on tests for anxiety, depression, and loneliness than men. So this underscores what Magano was saying about the effects of the pandemic on women. Disabled people reported higher levels of anxiety, stress, and loneliness, and poorer overall well-being ratings. And working from home may disadvantage or place extra challenges on women, people in the LGBTQ+ community, and minority ethnic groups. So I think you can see here that when we're talking about diversity, we're not just talking about gender, we're not just talking about race or ethnicity, we're also talking about abilities, disabilities, sexual orientation, trans people, any identities that are affecting the way that people have experienced the pandemic. So these are the groups that stand out in the UK figures as bearing the greatest burden. So while the detailed picture will be different in different parts of the world, the overall picture appears to be replicated globally. So what does this mean for employers? What it means is serious issues around human capital, and particularly among those groups worst affected. So as we're already seeing, the effects are absence, underperformance, resignations or turnover, and a limited candidate pool for recruiting to replace those people. If we don't act now, more women, more disabled people, more specific ethnic groups and occupations will take extended periods of sick leave and compassionate leave, will underperform due to stress, let alone having that trauma and stress themselves, and they'll leave the workforce entirely. And fewer will re-enter the workforce or start to enter the workforce. And this will lead to a major loss of diversity in the workplace, as my colleagues have already mentioned. We are going to reverse the gains we've made as individual companies and as a society. Now, these were the findings of a study conducted in 2021 into attrition during the pandemic. Among the survey respondents who had left their jobs, 45% cited the need to take care of family as an influencing factor in their decision. And a similar proportion of people who are thinking of quitting cited the demands of family care. So this seems to be one of the biggest issues in the attrition that we are witnessing. What can we do? Well, expanding childcare and nursing services or other home and family focused benefits could help. It could help keep women and other groups of employees from leaving and show that we really value them as whole people. We could follow the example of companies like Patagonia from the States that has actually retained nearly 100% of its new mothers with on-site childcare and other benefits for parents. But finding out what different employees want to see in the workplace is a critical starting point. Generalized scores on employees are not enough. We need to understand the experiences and needs of specific groups. So if you want to maintain diversity, you need to have targeted surveys and conversations, working to eliminate barriers to progression and ensure equitable access to opportunities is really important. And working with everyone in the organization to build an inclusive culture where everyone feels they belong is essential. In fact, that's the #1 issue for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people in the UK. The pandemic has given us an opportunity for a more human-centered approach and to create those high-performance teams we all seek by equipping them better from a resource and from an emotional perspective. Now, to give us more practical tips on how to actually do this, I'm going to hand over to Natasha Williams-Phatela. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Tich, Magano, and Jeanette for sharing these powerful insights with us. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to continue our conversation on the topic diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Natasha Williams-Phatela. I'm a managing partner at Frankin, Covey, Namibia. I've been operating in the field of diversity and intercultural management since 2002, when I joined KPMG Management Consultants in the Netherlands. There I worked with Professor Dr. Von Strompenaars, a leading expert in the field of intercultural communication. I think that my passion for this topic actually grew during my childhood years. I was born in a very diverse environment on the little island in the Caribbean called Aruba, where we have a mishmash of cultures. So as I speak to you on this topic, practical solutions on diversity, equity, and inclusion post-COVID, I'll be basing my thoughts on what I've learned over the years and what I am still learning on this journey. As I think about the topic diversity, equity, and inclusion, I realize we often experience a bit of a chill and a thrill. In other words, a bit of a frustration and an excitement. Most of us deep down truly believe in the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, we naturally get stuck on the challenges and obstacles. So let's think about this for a moment. I'll give you a few seconds to think about this question on the slide. As a consultant working in different organizations, I've observed that at the root of all the obstacles I've heard and seen is fear. Paralysis is a natural human response. When we perceive danger, our natural reaction is to fight, flee, or freeze. Paralysis is a freeze response. Here are some of those freeze responses I've come to realize and experience as I've been consulting. Some of these have even shown up more during this post-COVID period that we are in. First, there's what I call the can of worms. This is when we lack experience and feel that the issue of diversity is too big, too sensitive, and we would rather leave it. The second response comes from the lack of courage. We fear the consequences. Diversity is complex and it requires hard questions and answers. So we rather not delve into that because it requires us to look within. Thirdly, we have the analysis paralysis. Here we spend more time explaining inequality than tackling it. We rationalize our bias and then we find ourselves limiting ourselves in this area. We come up with a multitude of reasons for why things are unequal and should remain like this. Next, I often encountered what I call fragility and denial. This is our reluctance to recognize our own privilege. We become defensive. We need to move beyond these natural self-protective feelings of blame and of guilt and move towards ownership and action. Finally, we fall into the trap of scarcity thinking. We fear that if somebody gets a gain, you will get a loss. So we have the mindset of I win, you lose, or you win, I lose. And we fail to think win-win. If we can create more inclusion and equity, we will all win eventually. So you might recognize some of these fear responses in your organization currently. Your question now might be, Natasha, how do we move forward? Well, I believe the solution is courage. Yeah. First, we need to identify what is going on. Recognize that there is a problem and a need to change by moving away from scarcity thinking and reactive responses, applying reason rather than emotion. Secondly, connect with ourselves and with others. Embrace empathy and curiosity around diversity, equity, and inclusion, finding and creating approaches that will create an environment of openness where everyone ultimately feels valued and that they belong. Thirdly, choose to act with courage, to seek solutions at organizational, team, and individual level for diversity, equity, inclusion, redressing unwanted limiting practices that no longer work and have actually never been useful, and very often have been the culprit of the dysfunction in our organization. There are many solutions out there, so I just would like to share a few of them. So let's start at the organizational level, as I said before, 3 levels. So at organizational level, I really believe the first thing we need to get right is our purpose. Fundamental to everything is to create a shared sense of purpose, finding our why. So start with a clear purpose statement that is shared and include in this process as many stakeholders as you can. Form from board members to the leadership levels to staff, customers, everyone that you can think of that can provide relevant insight in defining your purpose. Secondly, policy level. It's important that we there revise or set up policies to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Recruitment targets, for instance, harassment and bullying, microaggression issues need to be looked into, and policies need to be written for that, because policies are the bedrock of culture change. But they can only support and be useful when they are truly going to support us in our practice and we truly follow through with them. Thirdly, I would like to say oversight. Establish a DEI or a Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee or task force and appoint diversity, equity and inclusion champions. Have them sit on recruitment or promotion panels, audit processes, etc. But be careful not to put all the work on the marginalized few, because they're already carrying so much. Then I'd like to focus our attention to leadership. Hold leadership engagement sessions and roll out a couple of leadership sessions as in awareness sessions, making sure that they are continuously engaged on this topic. And then expand the conversation to the rest of the organization so that everyone can start having those engagements and share their own stories and their experiences around this topic. A final suggestion is at organizational level would be to network and brand yourself. Link up with others and brand your organization for what you stand for when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Create or join networks with other organizations working in this field. For instance, women in mining or organizations focused on people living with disability, just to mention a couple, could be some that you could align yourselves with. As you do that, you learn and you support each other's causes. So that was the first level, organizational level. Let's go to the second level, which is really the team level. At team level, I'd like to share 3 things. Firstly, hold diversity, equity, and inclusion awareness sessions. The intention here is to build a common language for one to be able to express oneself confidently on this topic. Secondly, conduct a diversity, equity, and inclusion audit and find out how people are experiencing the work environment, but also identify the conscious and unconscious limiting practices in the workplace pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Finally, I'd like to share that what I've seen working very well are huddles. Yeah, where you come together in one form or the other, virtually or face-to-face, and you connect with one another and you share your stories and your experiences. And in doing so, everybody gets an opportunity to truly feel that they are valued because their experiences are worth listening to. So now we have looked at the organizational, at the team. I'm just yet to share with you the individual level. So at individual level, there are just 5 quick solutions I'd like to share with you. There are many more, but just let's focus on these 5. First off, appoint an in-house diversity, equity, and inclusion coach or counselor to support self-care. As we've seen through COVID, there's been a lot that has been going on. And as our previous speakers have said, we might be losing great talent as a result of COVID. So we do need to make sure that we do look after our people when it comes to how they've experienced the COVID pandemic, but even more, how they might have been damaged in this process even more from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. Secondly, teach staff how to effectively communicate. Help them master the language when confronted with biased treatment. What responses should you give when somebody says something to you that might be offensive, derogative, or what have you? Ensure that the induction program that is in your organization includes an element of sensitization that allows staff to really be able to identify and handle biased treatment in the workplace. Make reference to your diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, your task force or committee, and other practices you may have. Fourthly, I would say review the employee value proposition and your code of conduct that individuals can relate to and be able to understand what your organization stands for when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What is acceptable, what's not acceptable, and what do you do when certain practices show up or behaviors show up. And so to conclude on this individual level, I'd like to say, finally, help individuals to have the courage to share their story and communicate this confidently. Because when we do this, we disarm the silence around the negative impact and the bad and limiting aspects that diversity, equity, and inclusion might have. I'd like to end with these words from an American poet and activist. His name is Yolo Akili. Remember, oppression thrives off isolation. Connection is the only thing that can save you. Remember, oppression thrives on superficiality. Honesty about your struggles is the key to your liberation. Remember, your story can help save someone's life. Your silence contributes to someone else's struggle. Speak so we can all be free. Love so we can all be liberated. The moment is now. We need you. And so, as the saying goes, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with just one step. Don't allow the obstacles we spoke about keep you from not stepping up. Take the first step, and the next step will be easier. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to just share with you these few thoughts, and I'd like to now hand over to Jeanette, who will share with us our next steps.
So thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Magano, Tichaona. And thanks everyone for staying with us. I know this was a long series of presentations, but if there's any time left, let's use it to have a discussion. We would love to hear from you now. I'm sure that these presentations have raised a lot of questions in your mind, and maybe a lot of thoughts, some provocative ideas. So please feel free to share them in the chat, and all of us on the panel will endeavour to respond. Thank you so much and have a lovely day.